Hello, welcome to the 10th London Short Film Festival. My name's Philip Wilson, Festival Director.
Hi, I'm Cassandra, Festival Producer.
Thanks for coming out. We're getting very close to the end of the festival. We kicked off here in this very room last Friday. We're a week on till this Friday, and we finish here on Sunday night. If you haven't seen a brochure, there will be some outside, I think, after the screening. Have we got any left here?
Yes, we do.
So pick up a brochure, see what else is happening over the next few days, 2 days at the festival. We have screenings at the Curzon Soho, the Oban Cinema, the Hackney Picture House, and the Horse Hospital. So still a few bits and pieces for you to catch before the final day of the festival. We're really pleased to be presenting Peter Strickland's work tonight. I met Peter back in the 90s when I screened his first ever graduation short. So it's great to come this far with him as a filmmaker over those 15 or so years. God, that's scary. But Cassandra's going to say a few words about BAFTA.
Yeah, so we're really pleased to partner with BAFTA on this event. It's one of their BAFTA Masterclass Labs. The next one is on in February with editor Lisa Gunning. You can find out more on the ICA website, or for more information on the BAFTA events, check out BAFTA Guru on their website.
And without further ado, I'm going to pass across to Ian Hayden-Smith, who's going to host this evening's proceedings. So I think a round of applause for Ian and Peter.
Thanks, guys. Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm really happy to see such a full house here this evening for this event. Peter and I were talking earlier about this being a masterclass, and we said that's far too terrifying a word to use, so we're going to use discussion instead, partly because we want to get you involved and have a general open discussion. Also, with it being Peter Strickland on sound, we're probably going to be segueing off into different areas and not just talking about sound, but talking about Peter's career in general, both his early work and the 2 features that he's directed. However, you can't extricate Peter from the idea of sound in film with his first feature, Kathleen Varga, in 2009, when it premiered at the Berlin Film Festival. It won a Silver Bear Award for Best Technical Achievement in Sound. And then the film also won a BIFA, amongst many others, for Best Actor, Best Director, and Best Production. It also won a BIFA again for its sound. And so we are going to be touching on his interest in sound, how he's developed ideas around sound and also music, and his own experience as a member of a band, and how that's fed into his filmmaking process. I'm not even going to talk about what you just saw. He can explain why we decided to screen that at the start. But we are, before Peter and I go on stage, just going to show a deleted scene from his most recent film, Bavarian Sound Studio, just so we can get the discussion going. So if we can have the clip from Bavarian Sound Studio, please. Please welcome Peter Strickland. I thought we could start this talking directly about the relationship between sound and vision, not in the sort of conventional sense of since the late 1920s film having sound, but you have a very unique approach, I feel, not just to the use of music in film, but also to creating sound as a form of landscape.
I think, well, so much of it just came from a variety of things, not just music, but everyday occurrences. So, and for instance, the scene we just saw there, that was influenced by Gordon Brown. I know it sounds a bit ridiculous, but when he left his microphone on, when was it, in 2010, it was just fantastic. And there's this whole unpeeling of recorded reality going on, and so the scene was completely influenced by that, someone leaving the microphone on, but actually it's kind of pre-rehearsed. There's this other unveiling of recorded reality going on. So I think I'm fascinated by sound, not just in terms of the texture of sound, but also in terms of how it deceives you and confounds you and just completely it's this kind of portal into this other kind of reality. I know it sounds a bit kind of hocus pocus, but I just love the tricks you can do with sound, but also in terms of cosmetics. I know when you're shooting, you're always running out of time, and it's amazing how sound can. I think when you edit, you only have the footage you have. Maybe not so much now with CGI and digital, but I think certainly when we were using Steenbecks. But with sound, the sky's the limit. You can just go out there and get this, get that, and you can just fabricate so much that way.
But it kind of strikes me that a lot of people might place an emphasis on the image and the sound is secondary. It never feels like that with your work.
Yeah, I think I just kind of... I think it was just being the right age. I was... I saw Eraserhead when I was 16, and it was just blew my mind. I think had I seen it, maybe not the microphone. Speaking about sound, it's not the best mic, is it? Does it sound okay to you, or yeah? Thanks. Let's try again. Maybe just I had too many beers. I'm not sure, but how's that?
That's good.
Where was it? So I think that was the first, I guess, whatever you want to call it, personal art house film I'd seen. Before that, I think a week before, I saw Cocktail with Tom Cruise, and and suddenly here was a film that is just not functional in its sound. It's expressive and conveying this whole state of mind in this industrial world, and I just fell in love with it. And
we are talking about Eraserhead.
Eraserhead, and yeah. But at the same time, I got into bands like the Jesus and Mary Chain and My Bloody Valentine, and bands that were, I think, exploiting technological mistakes such as feedback, which I think now it sounds almost passé, but back then, I mean, even this was in 1990, it was such a revelation for me. Sonic Youth as well, and it just kind of got me into this path, both with music and film, of just discovering things, and that led on to people such as Alvin Lucia, who was another revelation. I mean, I discovered him really late. I discovered him around 2000. And he was someone who didn't really use effects, but he was just emphasizing natural acoustics. And he did this piece called I'm Sitting in a Room, where it's a really beautiful piece where he just says, I'm sitting in a room, I'm going to re-record the sound of my voice. So he re-records it on a tape, plays it back, and re-records the re-recording, and goes on and on and on like this, and gradually it deteriorates. And the room tone kind of reinforces itself, and at the end it's like ambient wash. But that's a very personal human thing, because he has a stutter, and he says this is also this kind of thing where I just want to smooth out my voice. And but it's a really simple but very effective thing where there are no effects whatsoever. It's just pure natural acoustics. So, I mean, I have to confess up front, I'm pretty appalling. And half the Hollywood films, I wouldn't have a clue how to do sound design for those, all this kind of sub-bass and so on. So I think the films I've been working on, they're not so, we don't use effects that much. It's all about perspective and positioning and foregrounding and so on.
There's also ideas and references that we'll come back to later.
Yeah.
I am just curious, because if you read any interviews with you, music and experimental sound is so upfront and centre in terms of what you have passions for. And I know you've recorded music, and we'll come on to that in a short while as well, but what was it that made you decide, no, definitely I want to go into making films, rather than just go straight into recording music?
I've got no talent for music. It's as simple as that. I don't know why I got into films. Sometimes I regret it. It's compulsion, isn't it? It's just, I'm sure many of you make films here, and every time I finish a film I say never again. It's like an addiction. You just go back to it. You know it's not good for you, and it's not good for your bank account, believe it or not. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your personal life. But I just get off on it. It just it's as simple as that. And I think, forget false modesty, I think I'm good at it. Not all the time. Whereas music, I'm a fan of music, and I got into music because I had burnt out with film. I made a film in 1995, and I just burnt myself out financially, and I just couldn't afford to keep going. But I still wanted to keep working, so I thought it was getting cheaper around that time, so I thought here's a chance to kind of use some ideas from film and just sheer enthusiasm kind of kept me going, really. But I'm not so good at music.
Let's go back to the first short that you made, Rising Within the Realm of Sleep. When was this made, and can you just before we show a clip of it, can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, so this is my. I think I haven't shown this since 1993. This is the first film I ever showed at the London Filmmakers Co-op. And yeah, this is my first proper Super 8 film. It's 5 minutes, and it's obviously it's flawed like hell. But I thought it'd be interesting to kind of show where it all started. I was massively into Cocteau and Tarkovsky, and you can see it here. And I just try to make my bedroom in Reading feel like something out of a Cocteau film. And it was actually really hard to kind of convince people to be in this. I needed an actress to be in my bedroom, and basically I got turned down again and again. And
did you actually say, I'm making a film, would you like to come into my bedroom?
Yeah, I did. I mean, there's no other way of saying it.
You wonder why you had problems.
I mean, eventually someone was stupid enough to agree to it. This is it. I think, this was on Super 8, which I think is sadly being outmoded, and this was edited, with a little, the splicer and so on. I was counting frames, 18 frames per second, and doing it to music. And yeah, I think the less I say, the better. But it's just, you watch it. I'm going to go to the toilet.
Okay, you show the clip, please.
This was in prehistoric times, before the internet. I come from Reading, and it wasn't so easy to kind of see certain films. And I remember reading an interview about Acid Mother's Temple, talking about Jimi Hendrix and certain types of rock and roll, and they said they just couldn't find this music, so they only read about it. So their music was their kind of imagining of what the music they read about sounded like. And I always felt like that was me, because I couldn't see Stan Brackage's films or Kenneth Anger's stuff. There was this great book called Light Moving in Time. Is it William Weiss? I don't know if anyone's read it, but anyway, it was really, really hard to see stuff back then. I mean, there was Jelly Sound Video and Mystic Fire, but it wasn't. Oh, and so I'm digressing a bit. Chris Cutler's label, Recommended, like Sun Ra. Anyway, we'll come on to that later. But so yeah, I would just read about Brackage and so on, and just try to imagine what their films were like, which obviously is nothing like what they did. But just putting cling film in front of a lens and drawing stuff over it, and everything was kind of in camera. But yeah,
it's interesting watching this and looking at your later work as well. We were talking outside, and I said about music, the music in your films being like a landscape, but in a way, perhaps it's not just surface; it's very three-dimensional. But it's also a character. It's an emotional element within your film, and not just there to bolster the visuals. Mm-hmm. There's something emotional within the music itself, and also within the sounds that you employ.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of that is subconscious, or I think it just ends up that way. I think when you do these things, it's very, I know everyone says this, but it's true, it's just very intuitive. And I mean, the way I've worked on the last 2 feature films is I usually turn up with a big suitcase full of a mixture of CDs, pen drives, just stuff that I've collected. It's either it's already been recorded and exists and we have to kind of clear it, or stuff that friends have given to me. And you think, right, we got all this, it's from all over the place, how do we make it sound cohesive, how do we make it sound as one? And I love working like that. It's a pain sometimes when it comes to crediting people, because it's never one sound person, it's like at least 20 each time. But that's the way I love working. It's just that surprise of getting the post and getting a file from someone. And you think, wow, this is just great, and there's going to be another one tomorrow or next week. And so, I mean, I don't know any other way of working. I know it's a bit unusual, but I mean, I never really, because I never went, and I tried to go to film school. The bastards rejected me, but I never trained formally, so the way I work is how I work with the band, and that kind of continued into film. And it was kind of weird, because when we worked with our band, we were always kind of, I'm not bitter about this, I'm not saying this in a bitter way, but we were just kind of ignored and dismissed. But as soon as we did what we did on film, it kind of worked, and we were genuinely surprised with the reaction to the sound in Cotton Lager. There was never this thing, oh, we're going to make this bitching great soundtrack. It was never like that. It's just, we work how we work, and you just work towards what the film needs. So Barbarian obviously needed something a little bit bombastic, but I can easily see myself doing something, you know, quite quiet. There's so much noise anyway in the world.
Going back to, you mentioned you're from Reading. Actually, I see people leaning that way. Can you see Peter over this side? You can. Okay.
Nothing much to see.
In the corner. I was going to say, because actually, why don't we swap places? They'd rather see you than me. You sit there. You mentioned Reading. You were involved with theatre in Reading, and I'm wondering how much that fed into your work in film, and particularly in terms of sound and also perhaps music.
Well, there was this great theatre called the Progress Theatre, which still exists, and there was no kind of selection process. If you had enthusiasm, you could just be accepted there. And I joined in 1991, and I wanted to direct, but I knew you couldn't just go straight into that. So I had to work my way up by acting, which I hated. But I thought it'd be quite useful to know what it feels like to be an actor, which is never a nice thing. But so I did a few plays, and but it was really useful just to know what it feels like to be on stage and how bloody awful it is. And yeah, I remember I had this one play where I had to just turn up in the dark on a desk, and the lights would come up and I'd be there by magic. And they'd always put my desk in a different place, so I was always feeling my way in the dark. And they'd all put the lights up too early, so I'm still going like this. And there was another play where it was She Stoops to Conquer, where the director wanted everyone to go into a freeze at the end, and then the lights go down, everyone tiptoes off, and the lights come up. And it was such a boring play that the lighting guy fell asleep in the tower. And we came to the freeze, everyone's just like this forever. And the director had to run around the car park, wake the lighting guy up and turn it down himself. But you know, getting through all that nonsense, I eventually directed my own adaptation of Metamorphosis, which is 1992, and which was great. I mean, it was a really, really good experience. And that was my first kind of messing around with sound where, yeah, I shouldn't admit to this really, but I nicked, I got hold of a bootleg of My Bloody Valentine playing live in Brixton for this roller coaster tour. And with a friend, we got, does anyone, you must know the middle bit, you made me realise when it just goes into this kind of wall of noise for God knows how long. But we sampled that and on tape cassette and just slowed it down like crazy. And we had this kind of continuous rumble through the whole play. I mean, you would never know it was them, but you know now. But and that was, yeah, it was very, very basic, you know, on tape cassettes, but I got a real taste for it.
And in terms of, you mentioned acting, one of the things that puzzled me that I didn't know about you until recently is that 12 years after that, you would have a role in Steven Spielberg's Munich.
Oh, yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, I was in Budapest at the time, and I heard they were doing this thing. And originally, I came on board to work as a production assistant, because I had done that already on a Bruce LaBruce film, which couldn't have been more different. But they said, "Oh, we need this kind of camp-looking barman," and so of course you come to me. So I had
you in the Yellow Pages, camp-looking barman, Peter Strickland.
So yeah, I had this kind of quite tasty moustache, and before they became trendy, and I don't know, I was kind of on the bar 2 nights in Munich.
So going back to your films, the next short that you made was Bubblegum, and I'm curious about where, coming from Reading, and then you ended up in New York and working with Nick Zedd with this film.
Well, in Reading, apart from the progress, which was great, I should say actually, if any of you have seen Barbarian, the narrator in the Box Hill sequence I acted with him. I know it's meaningless, but these things mean a lot. But anyway, but You know, in Reading, I just couldn't find kindred spirits. It was weird because at university there were two film clubs. There was the main film club and I had my film club. And the main film club was always packed out. My film club, usually one person, two people, maximum two people. And I was showing Sun Ra, Space is the Place. I showed Fandom and Least way before it got rediscovered on DVD. I was really, I'm going to boast now, I was really making an effort to get these films. Going through mail order, even travelling to get these. Nobody gave a damn. I was just really, I just despaired. So I thought, fuck this, I'm going to make my own film. And so I went to New York. I mean, I'm lucky because I have my Greek relatives in Queens, so I could stay for free. And there was this documentary. So I had this kind of script. It's not a good film. I mean, I'm not being modest. It's not a good film, but it was very necessary. It was very necessary to do that. You know, you learn from your mistakes, and so I'm proud of it in the fact that it led the way to kind of being a bit more together. But there was this documentary on Lou Reed's Walk on the Wild Side by James Marsh, strangely enough, and it was just great. I just called up. I had the BFI Film and Television Handbook, called up the BBC and said, can you put me on to Mr. James Marsh? And it was just so easy. And then James Marsh said, oh, here's Holly's agent's number. So I got a script to Holly. I couldn't believe it because I'm still a big fan of Paul Morrissey. And it was just great. And I went to New York absolutely terrified because I was always that kind of vegetarian freak in Reading. And in New York, you just kind of get accepted. And I remember looking through the phone book, and I found the filmmakers co-op number. And I went there. I met M.M. Serra, who was running it at the time. And there was this guy called Johannes Schunher, who's this great film programmer there. And I met him, and he put me on to a guy called Todd Phillips, who now he's making films like Hangover. But anyway, back then he was heavily involved in the underground film scene. So very quickly, I got Nick Zed involved, got a crew together, and it was actually quite straightforward. And so we did this film. How much did it cost? It went up to about 10,000 in the end, and it completely burnt me out for the next 6 years. I was paying off debts, but that film, I have to admit, because of Holly, because of Nick, it got shown at festivals. It got into Berlin, got into Edinburgh, but I just couldn't follow it up. No one was really interested afterwards, so that was a bit of a shock, because I thought once you've got a film in certain festivals, surely it's going to be easier. Not easy, but easier, and it wasn't. But anyway,
should we show
a very short clip? Yeah.
Okay. One of the only other filmmakers that I've heard of who takes lots of music sort of on the set with them is Wes Anderson, and
oh really? Oh.
Talks about having this iPod of really eclectic music, but he's also said that the music he plays on set for himself is creating a tone, creating a mood, but it's not necessarily the music that will end up in the film. I'm just curious about the choice, the choices you make when it comes to music, and at what point in time in shooting these shorts you decided that that's absolutely the piece of music I want, or in terms of your features.
I mean, definitely there's a difference between what I listen to when I'm writing and what I put on the actual film. I remember with Cotton and Varga, I was listening to Scott Walker, the Celeb Seal, a lot of Suicide. Actually, I always listen to Suicide when I write scripts, but what was it? Die You Bastard by Motorhead. That's always a good one when you're writing. But yeah, I mean, I think Motorhead and Cotton and Varga didn't quite work, but it's always. I mean, part of writing is so much of it is just cleansing yourself of your day-to-day thoughts. That is the hardest thing about writing, is just getting in that zone, which can take days, just sitting there, just forgetting about that person that annoyed you in the queue, on the bus stop or whatever, and it's and music really helps do that quite quickly, just really puts you in that zone. And sometimes it just sticks, and it's always a dangerous thing, and I think a lot of editors, directors and sound people have that problem when it comes to, what do they call it? Not guide tracks. Is it guide tracks? When you put something in... Thank you, yeah. Yeah, so you basically put a piece of music in, because you haven't got the rights or you haven't got the composer yet, and you put in a piece of music that kind of fits that mood. And the danger is everyone starts falling in love with it. The financiers fall in love with it, and it's like, well, shall we just clear that piece anyway? And it really, and you really resent the new piece of music. So I'm quite kind of careful with that. But yeah, I mean, I think when you do something, I don't think there's ever been a specific intention. You just find things sometimes by accident. I mean, with this one, I was just going through car boot sales in Reading, finding, you know, old records, and you just hear stuff and you think, okay, that's going to work. And
you're actually convincing me that Reading is this really huge cultural magnet that everyone gravitates towards and then suddenly gets repelled from and produces fascinating work. No one seems to believe that. After Bubblegum, you said you were exhausted and you didn't make films for a few years. And I've got two things that came out about. First of all, you worked for a video game company in Slovakia.
That was a bit later. That was in 2005.
So before that, you were in a band called the Sonic Catering Band.
Yeah, that was a cheaper way to just keep active. We were making soundscapes from cooking, and what we tried to do was not make it performative, as in pots and pans music, which has been done 1,000 times, but basically a kind of documentation of cooking. So really trying not to play up to the microphone. And I think just the analogy of treating sound the same way you treat food, and in terms of taking something raw and mixing it and processing it and chopping it up and so on. And at the beginning, we were completely naive, and we just fell in love with all this equipment, which is not that much, actually, like a flanger, a copycat. Actually, the copycat in Bavarian is the same copycat we had in 1996. And we just went overboard, and I think we were just drowning what we did in technology, in effects, and we weren't really showcasing the sounds. We were just showcasing the technology, and I think that's always a question you have to ask yourself, especially now when everything's being upgraded every 6 months. How do you prevent your work from purely being a showcase for a piece of equipment, and hence it becomes quite dated. So again, he was listening to people like Alvin Lucia or Robert Ashley, who were very spare on their effects, and just realizing that sound itself, it can be beautiful. I remember Chris Watson saying that he was, Chris Watson basically, he used to be part of Cabaret Voltaire, and I think he was involved with the Hafler Trio, but he also went on to do David Attenborough's sound for his documentaries, but he does his own field recordings. I think I might have got this wrong, but someone criticised him, saying, you're not really composing, you're just recording. So, but recording is an art form. To choose your microphones that is a creative decision, that is an art form, and where you place the microphone, and whether you're using MS stereo or mono or whatever. And his recordings are absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they're a huge inspiration to me. So I think, yeah, and I think it's just, I wanted to do this sound installation, which no one. Well, it basically didn't happen, but I remember going to the Great Court in the British Museum, and if you go there when it's quite busy and just listen to all the chatter around you, it's just this kind of weird, it's a bit like those whooshy bits in Suicide's Frankie Teardrop. It's just this very kind of heightened, ethereal noise, but it's just human voices talking about what they ate for dinner or whatever, and what I wanted to do was put tie clips on, basically, yeah, mic up each individual person in the Great Court, and record each individual conversation, and put a general mic catching the ambience, and use the individual mics only to just transcribe all the conversations and do them as text all across the walls, but play the sound, the collective sound of this kind of weird ambient noise. But I just find it really fascinating, and people like Francisco Lopez, when he did his recordings of the jungle or New York offices, just the sound of the ventilators and so on. So I get really into this. But
to give you an example, let's have a clip from Sonic Catering Band. This is track 8. Are we going with this?
Which one is it?
This is track 10, sorry.
Track 10. Okay, yeah, we'll have a quick listen.
both felt very self-conscious being sat on stage while everyone's listening to that. I'm curious about your interest. It seems to, in music, and sound seems to exist at a juncture between popular music and classical music, particularly sort of Avapart and Penderecki, you could sort of draw on, I guess. Is that true? Do you sort of find yourself crossing over between?
Yeah. I mean, this piece, for instance, that was inspired a little bit by Ligeti's music. Obviously, we can't come close to what he did, but no, I mean, definitely, I think more and more now with people just kind of it's all up there for grabs somehow. But I mean, just quickly about this one. This was the sound of gas from the oven, and it's a very simple piece where we just got one loop of gas, and we just pitch shifted it at different semitones and ran it through infinite reverb, not a plugin but an actual box, and made 17 minutes of different kind of harmonics out of it. But I was listening to, again, to basically Hungarian stuff, so Ligeti and Kodai, Mountain Night specifically. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to think which bands. It was all came from bands name dropping things. I think Zerbic France, and they were talking about Ligeti. A lot of bands were mentioning Steve Reich, of course. And I think especially when you see his pieces performed live, it's really, really visceral. It's so kind of co-opted into the mainstream now, that sound of Reich and Glass and so on. But when you hear it live, it's really, really intense. And I think so many kind of methods which I use in rock and roll are used in those pieces, especially whatever you want to call that type of music. I know they hate being called minimalists, but you know, phasing techniques and so on.
We'll come back to Steve Reich towards the end in direct relation to Bavarian Sound Studio. The reason I talk about classical music is I'm going to open the floor up in a moment, but I want to show another clip from one of your shorts, Metaphysical Education, and in this you use Bach.
Just because it worked. I was kind of we shot this stuff very quickly with, this was after this very long gap. This was in 2003, so Bubblegum was in 1995 when we shot it. This was 2003. And it was just, yeah, I really don't know why I used the Bach. I can honestly say it just worked. And that was that. I mean, I'm a big fan of St. Matthew Passion, so I just wanted to sneak it into a film somehow. Maybe that's it.
Okay, if we can show this clip, please. And this is Metaphysical Education.
Well, mainly it was just a chance to see how it's going to work with certain crew people in preparation for Kotlin Lager. That was shot by Mark, who shot the film. And there's not too much to say, really. I think it's quite a bit of a metaphor, and that's hopefully the last metaphor I do. A bit obvious, but...
Any questions at this point? Okay, no, there's someone over there. We're recording this, so if you can wait till the mic arrives, please.
Hi, I was just wondering if you, with that film, if you'd considered any other pieces of music before kind of committing to that particular piece, because it's instrumental. Well, you know, it's a choral piece of music, but the film has no dialogue or anything like that. You could almost put anything over it, but that's that one you thought worked. But was there anything else that you thought initially, or you know, you tried other things?
I tried a track by Stephen Dennis. I don't know if you remember him from Neighbours, but no, sorry. I did actually. No, I put Kathy Barbarian. Strangely enough, before that was way before Barbarian came into being as an idea. So I did use that piece, Visage, which we referenced in the film. So I started off with an old Hungarian kind of pop song from the 20s, I think, called János Hegyen. I don't know if anyone is from Hungary here, but because we shot that in Hungary. So it started off with this very jolly pop song, and then went into Visage, which is this kind of very strange, abstract piece of sound poetry. Don't know, but it just didn't quite work, and it was only those choices really. It was that combination or the Bach. I don't recall anything else coming in, but definitely doing that type of film, there was quite a choice of stuff, and quite often it's just not always, but what comes first just kind of sticks with you, and it's quite hard to kind of uncement it from the way you associate it with the image.
Okay, so it was around 2004 that you embarked on the writing of Kathleen Varga.
A little bit earlier, 2003. Yeah, I mean, we started preparation in 2004. Yeah.
But before you actually shot that, you shot the Barbarian short film.
Yeah, shot Barbarian in 2005.
And so, how did the actual idea for that come about?
It was a number of things really. I mean, just stupid stuff. I think for those of you who have seen the film, there's this gong player with blonde hair who gives Gilderoy a dirty look, and he's only in it for 1 second, but he had these kind of really annoying parachute pants on that sounded like thunder every time he walked. They just make this, just really, it's like kind of Ed Wood type of thunder, and we were just kind of joking about making Foley sounds for that, and it just kind of just came out of that really. And then the other ideas for Barbarian came later, but it was just this joke, and it was done for this competition where you had to do 5-second idents. And again, it was a chance to work with Mark again. Yeah, we shot it in 2005, and there was no intention of making it any longer. And I kind of put it aside, and I think in post-production on Varga, I thought, we could make this a little bit longer than 1 minute. And,
okay, let's see the short first.
That was a strange one, because the guys in the film, I don't know if any of you know the Bowman brothers, but Adam Bowman, the bald guy, he was part of Morphogenesis. It's kind of an electroacoustic improv group. And I think I maybe come onto it later, because I think some of the work they were doing, especially other members such as Michael Prime, really fascinating in terms of how they use sound. And not only electroacoustic sound, but bioacoustic sound. I mean, because Michael was, well, he still does it, he has this kind of bioactivity translator, I think that's what it's called, which he attaches to plants, and the electric signals can be translated into sound. And he did this album of psychoactive plants, and peyote and whatever, all kinds of things that can make you hallucinate. And he was just inherently psychoactive, because it's not inspired by these plants, it actually is the sound of these plants, it's the electrical currents of these things. It's fantastic, and it's really, really pure. He doesn't try to kind of manipulate it too much. And we did a Christmas single with him once. We did the Christmas pudding, and he did the mistletoe, and it didn't sell very well.
Shit.
Yeah, and he did a gig in Brussels, and I think people it was kind of the promoter kind of mismarketed it, which I'm very familiar with recently. But the audience were really pissed off. They thought it was something else. They thought it'd be a rock and roll gig, and he was just miking up these plants. And there was a riot. There was actually a riot, and they started beating people up and throwing plants around. And Michael got into a fight. And but he kept the recording. But of course, it's all from the mixing desk, so you can't hear all the shouting. You just hear the currents of the plants actually becoming syncopated and much more frantic. And I thought it'd make a great sonic double bill with Suicide's How Many Minutes in Brussels, when there was a riot with Suicide, and then Michael was getting, they're both in Brussels. But anyway, it's just one of these fantasy double bills. But anyway, coming back to the Bowmans. So I met Adam Bowman through Michael, and I love Adam dearly. He's been a dear friend for quite a few years, and I think part of Gilderoy comes from Adam. And I saw Adam and his brother Jonathan. They used to do these nights at the Bonington Cafe in Vauxhall, which I think, sadly, everything's kind of dying out now, which is really sad. But They had these great nights, like Noel Coxhill, Steve Beresford. They even got Reynolds from Argentina to come over, but they got stopped because they thought the Border Patrol thought they were terrorists. So they never made it to the Bonington Cafe. But anyway, I saw Adam and Jonathan do this piece called Purely Practical, where they were just reading out DIY catalogues, just reading out the specifications, the codes, and it was just fantastic. And I begged them afterwards if I could put it out as a 7-inch. It was actually the best-selling single I ever put out. But it's this weird mantra, but just reading out DIY catalogues. And it kind of harks back to, Henri Chopin and Bob Cobbing and so on, but I really, really loved it. And that was quite a big influence on Barbarian in terms of the way Gilderoy talks, in terms of the first drafts were really, really technical. He didn't say anything remotely emotional. There was no arc. It was an anti-arc. But that was a huge part with the Bowman brothers. But yeah, so this was this kind of innocent William Castle-esque kind of narrative running through it, and some of the elements I continued into Barbarian, like the UFO and the cabbages, of course. And that's it, really. We shot it.
You mentioned Adam being an inspiration for Gilderoy. I was just wondering, with the narrative of Barbarian, you've already said that you don't feel you understand technology, particularly when it comes to perhaps recording. You have an appreciation of music and a love of music, but not necessarily the actual creation process. And I'm wondering if that also fed into Barbarian, this fascination with how people create things and the technology involved.
Well, yeah, because I'm mystified by it, and I don't understand what these machines do, and I think it's more powerful when you don't get it. Is that me? Anyway, and I was speaking to someone who's saying, I don't understand what an oscillator does, and it doesn't matter if you don't understand it. It's actually better. I remember watching this footage of Luciano Berio's studio in Milan, and we were just nicking shots from that, just these slow zoom-ins on these white noise filters, but just the names, the WaveTech, was it the WaveTech 1110 oscillator? Does anyone know? Okay. But and a tone burst generator. I just fetishized the names, and I remember getting a list of all the equipment, and it was just great. And but I remember the first time I ended up in the studio, not as an accident, but I was doing something with a band, and through someone we got a deal with Mute Records, not a record deal, but they allowed us to record in their studio for free. And Colin and the band didn't get out of bed, so I was stuck in the studio by myself. And it was just the worst, one of the most embarrassing moments of my life, where we spent ages trying to secure this recording space, and then it screwed up. And but that was a big lesson for me, where you're just in the space on your own, and you realise you only need to know 20%. It's like with languages, you can get by on a certain amount, and it took me a lot of time just psychologically to just ignore that 80% of the studio and just focus on what we need to work on. And slowly I got the confidence to kind of, I can't, I'm not on the decks, but at least I know the basics. But I think, so much of it is you just communicate with the engineers, and there's certain shorthand things you can use, but it's fairly straightforward, and it helps to have people when you're working with them to know the references. So I mean, on Barbarian, Joachim, who was the supervising sound editor, he took his wife on their first date before they were married. He took her to a Merzbow concert. So I kind of knew we were on the same wavelength. But at the same time, it's kind of annoying. It's a bit like a game show where you're in the studio and you're both going to say the same thing to the mixer. It's just like, who says it first? So you have this kind of weird, kind of bell-like situation where who's going to press the buzzer first. But I mean, yeah, that is one of my favourite parts of making a film. Shooting's quite stressful. You have to get out of bed early, people are watching you, and there's always someone with a video camera lurking in the background. But people don't like sound studios, which is great for me. No one really goes in them, and you can just, it's just so much less pressure as well.
We're going to go on to Kathleen Barger in a moment, but thinking about the two features you've made, I guess I've always looked at your work and thought it's interesting that you're someone who blurs the line between high and low culture. For instance, Kathleen Barker is essentially a rape revenge film, but it's an art house rape revenge film. Barbarian could be seen as a film that links directly to the giallo films of the 1960s and 70s, but again, it's a very different take on it. But listening to the way that you talk about experimental sound and experimental music, it strikes me that you're not necessarily blurring the lines, but you just have an interest in anything goes. And in a way, perhaps whatever works, and you'll draw from any source.
Yeah, I mean, whatever's there. At the moment, it's been fairly restricted. When there's certain things I just come back to again and again. I think what surprises me is, so you've had generations of directors who have taken their cues from books, literature. That's what cinema is, just to many people. Then you had another generation of directors who took their cues from painting. You know, Greenaway is probably the most famous example. But there are not that many directors who took their cues from sound, and that's all I'm doing. Not just sound in terms of actually putting that sound in a film, and not only just the texture of sound, but also in terms of the structure of sound and how that can influence structuring a film. And there's certain albums I just come back to again and again. I think Faust's first album, I've used it in both films. I'm using it for my third film. I mean, in terms of the ideas, not the actual music. I haven't used any music from Faust, but their ideas really influence the structure and just kind of little portals within scenes. I think Nurse with the Wounds music in the 80s, I think Sylvie and Babs, Homotoki to Marie, if you listen to them, you know, you have this kind of repetition with different dynamics each time, and suddenly you've got this completely absurd thing thrown into the middle. Barbarian's just doing that. It's taking its cues from that kind of absurdist music. Or Franco Battiato is another great example. So it's kind of, yeah, plagiarism really. But I'm just trying to cover my tracks a bit more, because if you copy from films, you get found out more easily.
We're going to show, well, perhaps you could describe what we're going to see with Kathleen Barker.
Yeah, I think I kept a Super 8 diary of everything from the preparation up until the last day of shooting, just because it's such an amazing area in East Transylvania, and so I'm just going to watch a few bits. I might say a few things over it or not, I'm not sure, but I can't remember which bit it is actually. But we'll see.
If we start, you can talk over it.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
And Peter's wearing a very impressive hat.
Well, I kind of missed this period in a way. This is how we travelled, not all the time, but I mean, there were just some places where you just couldn't get to any other way. You had to go by horse. I think what helped with that film was the crew. It was quite a small crew, 11 people. So me, 2 assistant directors, camera loader, focus puller, Mark for the camera, 2 sound people, 2 chefs, and a guy documenting everything on Super 8. And so it's just cheaper in terms of food, in terms of car hire and so on, or horse hire. I think the only disadvantage of that is, I was saying this earlier, that because we're all doubling up on jobs, and I was taking on the job of a producer, and a line producer, and a production manager, and so on, that you basically become the bad guy that everyone hates. And I realised if you're doing these low-budget films, you've got to have a bad guy, because in Barbarian, I'm the director, and anyone's got any hassles, they can blame it on someone else. But so I think, yeah, I kind of wish I just got someone, I don't know, to just take all the flack. Actually, is Hilda here? No. The woman who plays Kathleen Barker, she's supposed to be here tonight, but I think she's still working. She'll ride in on horseback. I think we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was hoping you'd see Peter in the hat, which is he's sporting the ultimate in alpine chic. It's a very impressive hat. You Super 8 there. Let's move beyond the technology of recording music and sound to how you feel about sort of working on film and moving into digital? Because there's something that very much strikes me that when I think about your music, I think of it for some bizarre reason acoustically and not digitally.
I've always used whatever is available or what is affordable. So we always mixed and matched with the Sonic Catering Band. Sometimes we use tape, sometimes we use digital, and the same with film. We shot Barbarian on the... Gaga was on Super 16. There was a mixture of stocks. It was 500T and then 250D stock. And Barbarian was on the Alexa camera, and I was kind of hesitant at first, but we did some screen tests, and I was really, really blown away by the Alexa. Because I think all the digital formats prior to that, they never really did it for me. They always, especially on the skin tones, they just looked kind of pasty. But the Alexa was the first camera I thought, okay, something has finally arrived. But, it's a very big but, it's just very tragic what's happening now on many levels. I was speaking to some filmmakers in Belgium who did a film on 16mm in 2009. And they've just done their film now, and they went back to the rental place to hire the 16mm camera, and it's exactly the same camera they used in 2009 with the bits of gaffer tape left on from that same film. And nobody had used it since then. I think for camera people, it's just... You could train on film, and that's it. You're basically covered for life, and you're just honing it. You're honing your craft. Now you've got to relearn every year. I think I don't know if any camera people here, but it's just insane that you think you've got one format, and then comes another one, then another one, then another one. And I think here we've got, I think in Reading is a good example. They're trying to raise money for this for the digital cinema package. But who knows how long that's going to last for? I do love, I know people will hate me for this, but I actually love 2K projection. I think it's great. I've seen some really shoddy 35mm projection in my time. And, I think if anyone's carried a film print around compared to a hard drive, it's, you can see the joy of carrying a hard drive. But, my problem with it is it's just being forced on everyone. There's no choice, and I think it's really important to have a choice. And there are many arguments now about archiving and storage. And if we just look at our personal lives and how we have digital photographs or recording of mini discs and so on, and zip drives and then mini discs, and then we have DATs, and you're just constantly transferring across, and I just find it very, very unpredictable, and there was a stability with analog. I guess we don't know what it will be like in the future, but I think what I find so odd is that all this is purely innate to mimic analog. Digital is just basically mimicking film, so why don't we stick with film?
And the problem is with exhibition now, I think that at most there are 3 cinemas in Greater London that are capable of screening 16mm, which is unfortunately sad, and it's the way things are progressing, and soon that's going to be 35mm, and everything will go digital. And as you said, if you're archiving on one format and that format isn't quite as permanent as people expect it to be, then we're going to have problems.
Yeah. I mean, I know film degrades, but having your work on a hard drive, that's not exactly going to... There's no guarantee at all. And okay, you can argue against film. It's incredibly wasteful, and especially if you see the amount of chemicals, quite carcinogenic chemicals as well. But I think it's just it's very important to have a choice, and it does feel that everyone has to kind of conform to a standard. I mean, someone was saying this the other day, that we used to kind of laugh at Eastern Europe that you only have one make of this, one type of car. It's like, well, it's the same here now. We're just having one model of expression. And, I know I don't have an iPhone, but I know they can mimic Super 8, but they don't, do they? It's not... you can spot it from a mile off. It's a strange one.
We've got about 10 minutes left. Is 1 or 2 more clips to show, but are there any questions? Any further questions at this point? Is someone down the front?
Hi.
Hello.
A lot of filmmakers through their careers stick to one film composer, such as Steven Spielberg. A lot of filmmakers use different composers like Ang Lee, and a lot of filmmakers like Tarantino have hardly ever worked with a composer and use songs or old soundtracks. From everything I've heard tonight, you don't really fit into any of those categories, or do you?
I guess I'm just greedy. I want to use everything. There are many composers I love. But I think for me there are three levels. There's a composer, there's putting the needle on an existing piece of music, there are four actually, so it's like Monty Python sketch, isn't it? Putting the needle on sound, which, you know, like Luke Ferrari or that kind of stuff, which you think is sound design, but it's actually not. And then there's using sound mixed by various people. And I just like working with all of them. I guess I romanticize composers from the past more. There are not many composers now that excite me. I used to love Nyman when he did Greenaway's short films and the early films. I was massively into the Italian composers. And the Polish, you know, like Commodore, but you know, I always thought, you know, it was so great, you know, if King Tubby did the sound mix for a film, or just, you know, what you just think. Sometimes you think it's just quite conservative. Why couldn't the two, you know, lots of people work together? There's some great, you know, what if Phil Spector did Phil Spector did the sound mix for a film? So it's just great to approach someone. So, you know, I was quite lucky to get in touch with Broadcast and ask them if they wanted to get involved. And, you know, at one point I would love to get a musician to sound mix a film. I mean, when we did Barbarian, it was Doug Cooper, there were two mixers. It was Doug Cooper and Marcus Moore. But Doug, he's a DJ. Well, he's a sound mixer now, but his background is in DJing. And we were using, I'm not really a fan of dance music, but we were using dance music tropes in Barbarian, but for very different effect, you know, like using mid-sweep, which I think, you know, it's quite a cliche in dance music, but we were using it for the projection shots where it has this very kind of rasping sound where you're just rapidly altering the EQ from left to right. And if you take it away from the dance association, it's actually quite creepy. But so I mean, again, it's just taking your cues from music and putting them in a different context. But yeah, I just I can't. I'm a bit unfaithful, really. I can't really stick to one person. I think there's just too much good stuff out there. So I mean, again with Barbarian, I mean there was a guy. I mean Andrew Lyles. I think Steve Hayward recorded. Actually, I won't embarrass her, but one of the screamers is here, and we just sent Andrew the tracks, and it came back a few days later in the post, just 2 CDs rammed with these treated screams, which are really, really incredible. It's just, I just find it really exciting on a personal level, and just with this beautiful ambient kind of interweaving pieces. But no, I really can't see myself settling down with one composer. But it's strange because people accept that, in a Scorsese film or a Kenneth Anger film, you drop the needle on a piece of music. On Varga, we did exactly the same thing. We dropped the music on music, but it didn't sound like music. It sounded like sound design, but it was actually we licensed it basically. We cleared it so that if any of you have seen the film, there's the suicide scene where it has this kind of very heightened bird song and bird chatter, and someone very, in a very flattering way saying, "Oh, it must have taken you ages in the studio to do that." And so, no, we just got a piece of music and did that. And there's just so much stuff out there that you can use. And again, I kind of go back to people like Luke Ferrari with Presque-Ian. There's just absolute dynamite in that. I think there's just a wealth of inspiration in that album. I think, for me, there are kind of 5 key albums where you can just dip into and you can just steal to your heart's content. And
something's quite fascinating. You've talked at length in the past about the fact that there are films, specific films, horror films, for instance, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which uses music that people would not go to a concert to hear, or not necessarily the people who might go and see Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but there are actually a crowd who would go and listen to experimental music that wouldn't necessarily go and see a horror film.
Yeah, it's really
and
weird,
it's
isn't
a
it?
strange juncture between the two.
Definitely. I mean, it was there was the Texas Chainsaw thing where I guess people who would go to a Lamont Young concert or whatever would perhaps, I'm not saying would, perhaps dismiss the Texas Chainsaw Massacre soundtrack. But if you take it away from that film, it's this beautifully scuzzy piece of music on cred. It just sounds like the tape heads are clogged up with glue. But it's just phenomenal. If you listen to it in a concert hall, it would be, I think it would be held as this piece of avant-garde music. But because it's in this kind of sleazy film, I mean, now it's kind of getting recognition again. But I mean, we know the trouble that film kind of fell into. But on the other hand, there's also, I think, some of the ideas that Morricone was using with his improv groups, which are very similar to what Cornelius Cardew was doing when Eddie Prevost and Keith Rowe in AMM. It's basically electroacoustic music. And putting that in a horror context, it completely works. So if you listen to the Bird of the Crystal Plumage soundtrack, you've got dissonance, you've got free jazz. It's a tonal music, but in that context, it completely works. So I think so much of this is just about context and association. And that kind of goes into the idea of the book by Eddie Prevost. The title is really revealing. It's No Sound is Innocent. And when I think of those cabbage scenes in Barbarian, it's just a cabbage being stabbed. It's what you associate with your evening meal. But all you have to do is just have Giovanni queuing it up, saying, this is what is happening to a woman. It completely messes with your head. So in Barbarian, it's all about association and perspective. We didn't actually use that many effects.
And likewise, you said earlier that Steve Reich fed into Barbarian as well, a specific scene.
Yeah, it's a deleted scene, but it was a mixture of the Steve Reich influence in this Valerie soundtrack. I don't think if you know the Valerie soundtrack, Valerie and Her Week of Wonders by Lubos Fischer. There's this great label called Finders Keepers. I bought one of their records today, actually. But anyway, and they're just great. They just discover these things from all over the world, and completely, well, to me, unheard of. It's this beautiful, beautiful Czech soundtrack. These are almost as good as Lischka. And it's just these very eerie Catholic prayers. And we got someone, again, who's here, to just chant these prayers. And Andrew Lyles basically phased them. I mean, Steve Reich, does anyone know Come Out by Steve Reich, or It's Gonna Rain? But where he just phased these kind of document recordings. So they kind of go out of sync, and linguistically it just sounds like sound poetry. It's almost like the Goblin in Barbarian. It starts off as speech, and then it just goes off into this other realm, but all he's doing is phasing it. So that's what Andrew did in this deleted scene.
Okay, if we can show the scene from Barbarian, please. For anyone who hasn't seen Barbarian Sound Studio, there's actually a screening following this event next door on Screen 2, and I think if you have your ticket stuck with you, you can get in reduced price. I think it's £6 or something. I realised...
Is that reduced? My God, the times have changed.
I realised we're almost out of time. Any final questions before we go? Yes.
Some directors wait until post-production to bring in their sound designers and their supervising sound editors. As a person that really relishes and seems to build films with sound integral to them, how quickly in your process do you bring in a sound designer and a supervising sound editor? And do those people, are they constantly doing like rough offline dubbing mixes of rough edits for you during the process?
It depends. On Continent Varga, well, it's a weird one because I fell out with the first sound designer, and everything just kind of, there was a lot of work wasted because we just basically, I had to start all over again. So that was just one person originally, and it was very kind of painstaking. And then the next time I started work with Gabor, who was basically track laying on Pro Tools. The guy called Djurj, who was sound mixing. The guy called Tomasz, who was doing basically the dialogue cleanup. Because we didn't have much money, we didn't have like a proper dialogue editor, so he was using a lot of plugins to just clean up the dialogue. So we didn't have what we had in Barbarian. We didn't have a supervising sound editor. I was essentially that person. On Barbarian, so we had Joachim, the supervising sound editor. We had 2 mixers. We had Marcus and Doug. We had Linda Forsen, who was the dialogue editor. We had Krista Mellon, who was doing the track laying and effects. So they were at the end, but a lot of the sound was already there. So even before shooting, we had a lot of material. So all those kind of ethereal screams and abstract stuff, that came from loads of people like Andrew Lyle, Steve Stapleton, Colin Potter, a whole bunch of people. Colin Fletcher was doing the copycat feedback. So I think their job was more to make it cohesive and give it some kind of uniform quality. There was still a lot of atmos they had to put into it. I mean, Linda had a very big job. There was quite a bit of ADR to do for the film, and just going for all the dialogue takes, and obviously the Italian didn't help. So I think her job was very, very, very difficult and very time-consuming. So I think with Krista, I mean, I worked with him in this flat doing the basic track lay, and I don't like to go into a mix with everything completely locked down. I like to have the freedom to mess around, and I think in the edit with Chris Dickens, he's really good because he really, really believes in having as much sound in as possible. He doesn't, because I think some editors are a bit like, well, that's not my department. But Chris, so we do as much as we can, but things, I mean, even now, I don't really watch the film, but I'm walking down the street, I thought, oh God, we could have done this, we could have done that. So it was a constant process until the last minute. But yeah, I think it was. Sorry, can you repeat?
Well, it was a couple of years ago at the Golden Reel Awards, a very turgid awards ceremony was enlivened when Walter Marsh got a Lifetime Achievement Award, and he stood up on the stage with George Lucas, and they talked about the first film they made, and what used to happen is Lucas would edit in the day, Walter Marsh would come and do the sound all night, and then the next day Lucas would edit again, so that the whole film was actually, the sound and the visual edit grew together right from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And not many directors obviously take sound on board that quickly, but you're someone that particularly likes sound, so I was wondering how quickly you get dedicated sound people in, feeding in ideas and dubbing mixes.
Well, it tends to be people who are actually working remotely, so they will often work by post or by email, so stuff would just come in, and then with Chris, a lot of decisions are made with him in the edit. And with James, who did the music, that was a back and forth thing, so he would send music that would influence the flow of the scene, and sometimes vice versa. We would send him a scene which would influence the music. So it's a whole mixture. I think originally it was intended that all the music would be done prior to shooting, but it didn't work out that way. But I think, yeah, I think it's just a back and forth thing. There's no plan as such, but the weird thing is, a lot is done up until the sound mix when we go in, and we had quite a lot of time in the mix, but there was just never enough time. There's always just never enough time, and we just scratch our heads like, where did all that time go? What were we doing? So it is a bit weird. But no, I think with Varga, again, it was a case of having a lot of material already there, and just dropping it in and just finding the right spot. So it wasn't really sound design as such. It was more a case of positioning in the mix and so on. And I try as hard as I can to avoid library sounds. I've got this aversion to them. I think in the Equestrian Vortex, we felt, well, Santini's a lazy director. He would use library sounds, but I think they just come with so much baggage to them. And you hear this. I remember having this argument with the sound guy. I was trying to find people for Barbarian, and then I was talking about crickets that we need, or cicadas, and he said, "Oh yeah, I've got 2 gigabytes of cicadas," and it's like, it's not the point. And I mean, it's a combination of factors. It's not just someone being lazy. It's time, it's money, it's schedules, and there isn't. But there is this culture now where people are just reluctant to go out there and record something. And I remember having an argument with someone about this, saying, "Well, what do you mean by original sound? You know, we paid for this. It's ours. It's a library, but it's." I'm a bit old-fashioned, you know, in terms of the Walter Murch, Ben Burt school. I guess Star Wars is a very mainstream film, but I think the methods for Star Wars were far more experimental than some of these experimental films that get made with just plugins, and you just hit on an Atmos track. And the whole point of what they were doing, and Alan Splett, was it wasn't just the final sound, it's actually the process of coming to that, and I think that's kind of lost now with digital. That everything is so easy, you can get any sound you want now, but that's still kind of defeating. And even then, I don't think you can, because you have this kind of, what's it called, this kind of plug-in where you can just recreate the room tone of any space. You know, you can recreate the Sistine Chapel. I can't remember the name of this plug-in.
Convolution reverb.
Okay.
Impulse response.
It doesn't. I'm not convinced. Are you convinced by it?
Horses for courses.
Horses for courses. Because we tried something, and again, we're going back to Luke Ferrari. We're trying to recreate this kind of Presque-Rian ambience, and for me, not bad, but I'm just not convinced yet. There's nothing like getting someone out there, down, you know, the Pyrenees or wherever it was, and just hitting record. I mean, it's obviously getting there, but I don't know how much of this is psychosomatic, that you know, because you're making that film, you know it's someone hitting a plug-in, and therefore it doesn't sound right. And if you hear it in the audience and know, maybe are fooled into thinking we went down to the Pyrenees with the UK Film Council's money, I don't know, but I mean, maybe the psychosomatic thing comes into it, but I still think people should get out, you know, put the anoraks on, get out more. And I mean, Ben Burt, I mean, he was going to the zoo, recording different animals, mixing them together for Chewbacca and stuff, and electric fences with magnets for the stormtrooper sounds. And I think Lucas, you know, I'm not really a fan of, but all credit to him, he gave a lot of time to Ben Burt for doing that. It's quite rare to find that now. I mean, we were pretty lucky with Barbarian, we had quite a bit of time, but you always want more time, don't you? And I still think, I think it is, you were saying, it is getting slightly better with sound now, that more attention is being paid to it, but I think there's still so far to go, and I think trial and error is really, really important, to go out there and make mistakes and try different things.
I think it's just an acknowledgement of sound design. I think in recent years, it's moved beyond the industry, the general cinema-going public have an awareness of what sound design is, and sound in a film is no longer just the soundtrack. It's actually creating an atmosphere. And I think it seems that there's more discussion, even amongst critics, about the fact that you have certain directors and you talk about sound design within their films.
I remember going to, this is slightly off tangent, but I remember going to a sound engineer and just asking him, I'd listened to something he produced, and I said, I played him this track, can you do that bit in this track? And he said, I haven't got a clue how to do that, because there was an accident. We were just messing around, we just came up with this. And again, it's that trial and error of just having these happy accidents and hitting on something and hoping it's recorded. I mean, one of my favourite memories is I was recording with a band, and the engineer, this is in Hungary, he used to work for the national radio in the 70s, and he was quite gleefully erasing all these party conference tapes from communists, and he had kind of 1-inch analog tape, and he'd always check them just to see what was on before he erased them. So, oh, it's another one of those bastard communists, let's erase it. And I listened to it and I thought, this is just wonderful. And it's all these different languages, you know, just Slavic, Hungarian, Romanian. So, you know, you have someone speaking in a language, and then all these translators, these very stern, cold voices in different Slavic languages. And it was just an hour, and I made a private tape before he erased it. I made a private tape of all these voices, and basically, you know, just went wild on the mixing desk, just doing different EQs and reverb and so on. and I often play it just to go to sleep at night. And that influenced the scene in Barbarian, where you hear the prayers and there's tape loop around the room, all multi-tracked and with different levels of EQ and reverb on. And that was an accident from communism, really.
Just good for something.
Yeah, yeah.
Unfortunately, I am getting a signal that we do have to wrap up. A moment ago, Peter mentioned a film called Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. It's an absolutely beautiful film. There's a great London-based DVD label called Second Run.
Oh, that's a great label.
It's a really good label. They don't just specialise in Eastern European films, but they have released a lot of them. One of the films they released about 2 years ago is Valerie and Her Week of Wonders, and it's a really beautiful version of that film, so do pick that up. Both Kathleen Barger and Barbarian Sound Studio are available on DVD thanks to Artificial Eye. But do, if you haven't seen Barbarian, go next door and see it, because it is fantastic watching the film in the cinema. And if you haven't seen Kathleen Barger, it's an incredibly beautiful directorial debut by Peter. Thank you very much to BAFTA, the ICA, the London Short Film Festival, but most of all, can you please join me in thanking Peter Strickland?
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Thank you very much.